Have you been wondering what you need to do to start an off-grid homestead in the woods of Alaska? Hi everybody, I'm your host Natalie, and welcome to episode 1 of My Far North Cabin. I do this show out of my cabin here in South Central Alaska, where my partner Jason and I live 100% off the grid, about a half mile from the road system where we have been slowly developing our homestead for the past 7 years. On this show, I discuss all things Alaska and northern life, off-grid living, reviving valuable self-sufficiency and homesteading skills, and I'll also be sharing stories about all the wild things that have happened to us since we moved to the last frontier. I enjoy learning from experiences of others, such as those who are living a homestead or off-grid life, here in Alaska or elsewhere, and those that just have a homesteading mindset. So with that, let's get started. So it's summer here in Alaska. It's July. We still have a great deal of light. The midnight sun is still out during the evening. And we've actually had quite a bit of rain so far. It was a very cold, wet spring. And what's surprising about it is that a lot of the flowers blooming and even the bloom of the mosquitoes seem to be delayed by a couple of weeks just because of how cold it was, which is something I've never seen here before. So it's been an interesting year, and every year like that is interesting. They're all different. There are things you can count on, but then there's things that never fail to surprise me. And right now I'm sitting in the mosquito shelter, which is a screen tent, because the bugs are pretty bad this year. And I don't get to have sunlight like this for a large portion of the year. So it gets kind of hard when you're fighting off hordes of bugs just to get your fix of sunshine. So I sit here in my shelter and I'm happy. You know, insects, climate, those are just some of the aspects of life up here. And it's hard to believe how long we've been here. And you don't have to flip channels or scroll through social media for very long before you see posts about homesteading in Alaska and how hot of a destination it is right now. And it was 7 years ago when we made the leap to off-grid rural life. So I'm often asked, what was that like for us? How did we decide to go off the grid in Alaska? And what was our criteria for finding land? So I can start with a little bit of background about how we even got here. We used to live in Oregon. I'm originally from California, but I lived in Oregon for a long while. And when my partner and I were living together there, we were dealing with a significant rental crisis. Gentrification was getting out of control in the city that we were living in. And our finance woes were great. We were having a very hard time keeping up with the demands of skyrocketing rent, grocery prices, and just having a hard time maintaining a work and college balance, going to community college at the time. While we were going through this, Jason and I had a lot of deep talks about survival, bushcraft skills. We were even doing some aquaponic gardening in our backyard, which was providing us with food, and I really enjoyed doing that because as a young girl, I had always had a homesteading mindset, but I never had the courage to believe in myself or to believe that an opportunity to do something like that would even be possible for me. So I just never pursued it. I stayed kind of a suburban girl and did the 9-to-5 thing and the things that I kind of thought were expected of me. Before I moved to Oregon, Jason was living in an intentional community deep in the woods on about 80 acres in Oregon. And they provided all their own food, had their own livestock, did canning, everything. And Jason was very inspired by this. And he had always had a homestead dream, a dream of a home in the woods. That's what he wanted. And seeing the intentional community, that really cemented how he wanted to do things. Well, there came a time when we couldn't pay our rent anymore, and there was no way to sort of make ends meet living the way that we were. So we ended up getting some things together and moving into a travel trailer and our truck. And we lived up and down the Oregon coast for 6 months, which is not cheap, especially if you're using primarily savings and credit cards, paying for gas, being turned away from campgrounds because your rig is too old, which is a problem that we dealt with. And when you don't plan or set out to do the hashtag RV life, it can be not fun. So after about 6 months of that, we had a little miracle happen to us. Jason's grandmother, who knew a lot about Jason's dream of having a little place in the woods that could be self-sustaining, decided that she wanted to give him his piece of inheritance early if he would invest it in a homestead that was going to provide for us in the future. So this proposal totally knocked our socks off. We didn't really have a lot of income. We're not really high income people. And so this took us completely by surprise. And we are still so grateful to her to this day for giving us the help that we needed to even achieve this. She's an absolute saint. And we had been talking about homesteading in Alaska the entire time we were in the RV, and a little bit before that. We had even been looking at land prices and seeing, wow, it's really expensive to buy land in Oregon and Washington, like cost prohibitively expensive. But in Alaska, this might actually be achievable. There are far more lax zoning laws, not to mention the wilderness and the scenic beauty, as well as the climate. Yes, the winters. We knew about this and we understood how harsh they were going to be as much as we could back then. But also, it was getting pretty hot in Oregon, and we definitely wanted a cooler place to live. So we made up our minds. We bid farewell to our friends and our past neighbors, and we got passports, maps, extra gas cans, drove the Alaska Highway, which deserves its own episode, and we ended up getting situated at a campground here in South Central Alaska. And our objective was to find a place that met most of our criteria before October, when the first snows would hit and all the campgrounds started to close. So you might ask, what were our priorities when looking for this dream homestead land in Alaska? Well, obviously, we had to stay in a budget. We may have had funds that we didn't count on that were a blessing that dropped in our lap, but still important to us to be frugal and to find a place that had at least 7 or 8 out of 10 for what we needed. 10 out of 10 usually has to be built. I don't believe that unless you're a millionaire, you can find 10 out of 10. But we were definitely looking for something that was suitable enough that we could work on in the years to come. After our search, and since living here and seeing some of the things that people I know have gone through when they've moved here for the first time, I have narrowed it down to a few key things for when you're looking for land here. So the first thing is location, location, location. Alaska is huge, okay? It's 663,000 square miles, roughly. You can fit 2 states of Texas in it. I'm sure you've heard that adage. And it's divided up into 5 distinct regions. You have the far north, which has Ukivik, which is formerly known as Barrow, Kotzebue, and Nome. The southwest region, which has Bethel, Dillingham, the Aleutian Islands, and Kodiak Island. Then you have the interior, what's called the interior, and that is where the city of Fairbanks is, and as well as Nenana, Delta Junction, and Tok, which is a border city when you first come in on the Alaska Highway. And then you have South Central, which is the area that I live. It's quite a large area, and it contains Anchorage, Glen Allen, Valdez, and the Kenai Peninsula. And then finally you have Southeast Alaska, which is where Haines, Juneau, Sitka, and Ketchikan are. So it's a pretty vast area. And all of these regions have a very specific microclimate within them. And so it's important to look at the temperatures that are common there all year round, and how many days of light and dark are expected, because the midnight sun and the darkness in winter get more extreme the farther north you go, so it's important to keep that in mind. I typically suggest, if you're new to homesteading in Alaska and you want to live here year-round off-grid, that you might want to start in South Central, Southeast if you can afford it, and maybe even the lower interior, because the environment, the winters, and everything can kind of be a shock. Maybe not at first, but eventually when you begin to run into issues with where you are and you're not familiar with it, and acclimatization gets kind of difficult. Also, since Alaska's so big, not all parts are connected by roads. And even if they are, it can take forever to drive between 2 different parts because mountains. So I suggest before you even arrive that you research and pick an area of the state that you will be setting up a base of operations in which you're going to go and look at places that you want to be. From there, it's easier to iron down a place that'll have campgrounds, long-term RV parks, or some other place to stay while you're looking for prospects. So I just want to start out by saying that not all land that you see for sale here in Alaska is suitable for year-round homesteading. I mean, there are plots without a structure on it that are raw land, some with cabins, mostly dry cabins, which means that there's no running water and you have to provide your own power. And depending on how much you have budgeted, you also have to consider what you're going to have to build on that land to make it sustainable. So being able to investigate it firsthand is kind of crucial. Some places are very swampy, like around here we have that problem. The ground is very wet and it's not that great for building on. It's very challenging to build on. There are ways to do it, but it can be very challenging if you're not prepared for it. And you may want to build a cabin, a home, park an RV or a bus, or you might want a basic cabin that's already there so that you can build other structures and have the home base already taken care of. And it's important to know that if your goal is to shake off civilization, just know that the further from a road or a town you are, life can get a little more challenging. So being ready for these challenges will help you hit the ground running when you get here. And while I know that this last piece of advice is often cost prohibitive or just logistically impossible, buying land sight unseen, which is a purchase without actually setting foot on the property yourself, is kind of an ill-advised move, and I don't recommend it if at all possible. I mean, you're going to be investing your savings, your time into this, so you shouldn't regret it later by not realizing that the area was completely unsuitable for you. I mean, year-round homesteading is way different than vacationing or coming out for a couple of weekends. And there are a great deal of places for sale here in Alaska that are much better for the latter than the former. If you can't actually get here and look at the land, something that you can do is make the realtors or the property owner work for you by taking a FaceTime, a Zoom, or a Duo of the land with you on the other line, and that way you can ask detailed questions and see what it's like. And you can get more of a feel for it than you can in just static photos. If you're not sure what to ask about, just stick with the rest of this episode and you'll find out what can be on your checklist. So what would be the next logical point of criteria after location? Well, that would be access. So let's say you've picked a section of the state, you've figured out getting here, you have a campground or a place to stay, and now you're on your way at last to check out some ads for places that you want to look at. Well, good access is really crucial for a good year-round life here. And as I said before, the farther off the road system you are, the more challenging things can be. And we're going to get into that a little bit here. More distance between you and a maintained road usually means having a vehicle other than your truck or your car or what have you. Many trails here, a lot of ads you'll see for cabins say they're down a trail. Many of those trails can't support the weight of a street vehicle because a lot of them don't see maintenance for decades and are only ever used by ATVs or snowmobiles. And if your only access to the property is a boat or a plane, if you don't have those things, you'll need to get them. And just the trips and fuel can add up quickly. And it will be tricky for getting a lot of things in and out of the land. When you live off-grid and you live rural, you still need to get supplies in like everybody else, only you have some extra ones like gasoline, propane, building materials, and groceries. I heard a joke once that homesteading and farming is basically moving heavy stuff from one spot to another spot over and over again. And it really is no joke. You will have supplies to get in, especially if you want to bring in materials to build new structures like chicken coops or gardens, or even if you want to bring in dirt, things like that. And so land and access in has to be really supportive of that for you to have a good existence here. Also consider this: emergencies such as wildfires or injuries require a quick evacuation from your property. And so that's the other thing to consider when it comes to access. It's not just about supply runs, it's also about getting the heck out if you need to. It's good to have a first aid kit that's very comprehensive in your home and good set of first aid skills, because you are your own rescue service out here. But when you need to leave the property, especially if there's a forest fire and you get an evacuation warning and you have to leave quickly, you don't want to be inhibited by a long, harrowing distance just to get to a safe place. If you want to be able to drive with your daily driver vehicle to your front door in the woods year-round, there will have to be a well-established gravel driveway with culverts, drainage for runoff and snow melt already existing on the property that you're looking at. Or you're going to have to put it in yourself, which can be very expensive. The materials, the permits, the equipment rentals, what have you. And you will very likely have to plow it yourself in the winter because the boroughs are usually only responsible for the maintained roads and highways. When it comes to the trails off the road system that are long, half mile, few miles in, that lead to a property or a series of properties, it's important to know that many of those are public throughways, so therefore they can't be modified by anyone other than the state or the borough in which you live. Getting them to do that can be a very long, arduous, and sometimes impossible process. So if you arrive and you see the trail and it's in poor condition, you're probably not going to be able to fix it legally. Also, I strongly advise not risking your only vehicle driving on a trail that you're not familiar with just to look at a property. It could sink, it could get stuck, it could get damaged, and road services may not be able to help you depending on how far away you are. So it's a good idea to know where the property is. I recommend you park, lock your car, wear a backpack with survival gear, and be prepared for the weather. Know exactly what property you're going to and how to get there. Tell someone you're going there, and be armed because this is serious wilderness, and please take it seriously. And that way you can know, am I going to be able to drive on this trail? Well, if your feet are sinking into the mud, I wouldn't attempt it. No matter how good your vehicle might be at handling rough terrain, this is different. Nevertheless, the likelihood that you'll be needing a snowmobile and an ATV are very likely for many reasons. And you can get used ones at a relatively low price, specifically if you buy them in the lower 48 before you get here. These vehicles are very high in demand in Alaska, and so therefore the price is very high. So that's a way you can get around that. Bottom line, many realtors will not show you a property by risking their own vehicles down off-road trails. And for good reason. They can be very dangerous. They can eat vehicles alive, and getting them unstuck can cost you a lot of money. And if you're starting a homestead, you don't want to have to worry about this problem. So access, super important. So I'm chuckling at the irony of this. I've actually moved indoors because it started to rain. And that leads me to the next criteria point, which, if you haven't already guessed, is water. So when we were looking for land, we didn't even bother checking out any properties that didn't at least have some moving water source, like an accessible lake, creek, a stream, or that already had a deep and functioning well. And when we were on our land search, we decided right away that hauling water was not something we preferred to do long term. If your goal is self-sufficiency, then collecting water on your own land is the big one. I mean, water's life. We need it for drinking, cooking, laundry, showers, gardens, animals, and so much more. And the more people you have in your family, the higher your water needs are going to be. Places that have a well, for example, can be a crucial resource beyond its obvious convenience. It can be a tool for fire protection and control, and we can get into that sometimes when we talk about wildfire preparedness. Properties that have waterfront or water running through them, you're going to have to research your water rights. And also these places tend to be more expensive and sometimes have less land, so you'll have to check that out and see if it works for you. If the property has a well, you may want to get it tested and see if the pump is still functioning like it should. The requirement for a generator with the capacity to run that will be necessary once you move in. If there is no well, installing one yourself is possible. It can run thousands of dollars, though. That's something to know. And then there's the installation, which can usually be done rurally by certain private companies or individuals, but really all this adds up very fast, especially if access is an issue. The farther in they have to go, and depending on the time of year, things may not line up the way you want them to. One of the reasons that we settled on this cabin is because it had a well with an electric well pump that could be run by the generator that was already here. If there is a water source on the land, you can collect and haul water yourself. Just make sure you know what your rights are, and remember that the water will have to be boiled and then filtered before use. And also, in the winter, collection becomes more challenging. Moving water doesn't freeze over as fast, but ice will form on lakes and ponds, which has to be cut into over and over again usually to keep accessing your water. But something we also considered, especially if we were going to be getting a place that had some water source on the property, like a water body, is that, and this actually occurred to me recently with the level of rain that's been passing through this area for the last few days, you may want to research if it's in a flood zone. something to check out, look at the lay of the land, see what your elevation is, and really think about that. Do you have to have a well? No. Is it more convenient? Yeah. There are people who haul their own water that are totally happy with it, and I guess it's down to your lifestyle, your family size, your goals, your personal preference, and how you're going to manage access in and out of the land all year round. It's also good to mention that water can be obtained in many rural towns via a community water source, whether that's a well or a spring that the public can access. Ours in town is coin operated. It's a well, and it dispenses several gallons at a time. So you just bring your own containers, you bring some money, and you can have water. Just remember, water's a daily need, and it goes faster than you might expect. And it's a lot of trips in and out, which uses gas and increases demand on whatever your off-road vehicle is. It's like that old saying that when you collect your own water, you'll appreciate every drop. So you're likely to do everything you can to stretch that water, especially if you're hauling it in. Rainwater can be collected in the summertime here. We've been having so much rain here in South Central Alaska since spring. And I've been collecting a lot of rainwater, which, we could put in the tanks and filter for drinking and washing. But right now we're primarily using the well. And I'm using the rainwater to water my garden because it's convenient, it's right down there, and it's nice. When the freezing weather approaches, I typically have to empty these tanks out and shut them down for half a year because they will freeze and expand. So we keep our primary water containers indoors, and I typically do rain catch from May till late September. For our indoor water system, we use two 55-gallon potable water tanks that are kept upstairs, and they're piped downstairs to the kitchen sink and our bathtub using gravity to provide the flow. This is known as gravity feed. We don't drink water straight from the well. We use something called a Berkey, which is a stainless steel dispenser with ceramic filters that makes the water safe to drink. Our plumbing goes to the outside of the cabin in a series of French drains that we had to dig ourselves, and that works well most of the year, except December through April, where we basically have to keep a bucket underneath the sink and deposit wastewater in one designated place. And we use biodegradable soaps and make sure we don't put anything in it that would harm the environment around us or poison our well. And in the beginning, when we first got here, the cabin had no shower or tub to speak of. And for 2 years, we had a wash tub at home, and it just made us long for a private shower. So we ended up getting a deal on a tub a couple years later and plumbed into our existing drain system, hooked it up to our tanks upstairs and the 5-gallon electric water heater that the cabin happened to come with. And with some flexible pipes and a handheld shower head, we can now take showers in our own home, and it's an unbelievable luxury. It took a lot of work to get that in, but that's something that you can try and achieve in a cabin, or if it already has something like that. There are electric water heaters you can run with a generator, and there are also propane on-demand water heaters that you can use. Public showers and laundry facilities exist at local stores in small towns here, and so do community water sources. And so these services are great in a pinch. If you're like, oh man, I need a shower, and we're just not anywhere close to installing a place to take a bath or a shower in our cabin, well, you can go to the nearest town and take a shower. Because it's not just good for getting yourself clean, but it's also good for relieving stress. Because sometimes I don't realize how stressed out I am until I take a shower, and I'm just like, ugh. Laundry we do in the sink or the tub. And we have a regular washing machine, believe it or not, that we can use when the generator is on. But we have to fill it manually, and it's got a few picadillos, so it's not something I really like to use, not to mention the power that it requires, which also requires fuel, which requires money. It's like seeing that meme that goes around saying, live off grid and have no power bill. It's like, well, you do have a power bill. It's just that you're in charge of when you pay it, because really it's the fuel that you're paying for to run your generator. If you have solar or something like that, that will require less money, but it's not always enough to run something like a water heater. You typically need some kind of a high-powered gas or diesel generator or propane fuel to do this. Heating water takes a lot of energy. And I hope you didn't think that I forgot about the toilet. Out here, it's basically all outhouses and composting toilets. I will say that while we did have an outhouse to start with, we ended up constructing an indoor composting toilet. And those are really nice if you like an indoor space for bathroom needs, While there are many that you can buy that sometimes take small amount of electricity to run constantly, to run dehydrating fans and things like that, it's super simple to construct one yourself. Outhouses are pretty easy. They're pretty basic. As long as you keep the path to them dug out in the winter. If you're new to it, it can be kind of interesting to learn to be using a toilet outdoors in all kinds of weather, including with mosquitoes and sub-zero temperatures. It's all part of the wonderful world of waterless toilets. So all in all, how you'll meet your water and bathroom needs is a huge thing to consider when you're checking out a place, along with having good location and reasonable access to your place year-round. So we've gone through a lot so far. I'd say the elephant in the room at this point is heat, because I don't have to tell you how cold it gets up here. You should know if you're moving to Alaska that you are going to deal with cold. And this is a good callback to where we were talking about location, because you'll be aware of just what you're getting into if you've done your research. But it's also good to mention that even if you research temperature trends in the area that you might be planning to live in, it doesn't necessarily mean that next year will be like that. In Alaska, you have to expect the unexpected and prepare for the furthest extreme and cold, just as a safety precaution no matter where you settle. Expect the best, prepare for the worst. You'll feel better that way. And winter is just an inescapable fact of life in Alaska. We have at least 6 months guaranteed winter-like weather. So it begs the question, how are you going to heat that living space? And if you're moving in with a bus or an RV, how are you heating that space? There are many people that have installed small wood stoves in buses or travel trailers. Just make sure that you're doing it safely, because wood stoves have to be run a great deal all through the winter. If you're finding a piece of land that happens to have a cabin on it, well then, does it have a wood stove? If you're going to be living in a place with a wood stove and you're going to be cutting wood, it's good to consider how many acres this land is that you're looking at. How many trees are on that land, roughly? Do you have enough trees to supply you with 5-10 years of firewood? It seems like an extraneous thing to look for, but it's really easy to blow through a lot of trees and a lot of firewood, especially the farther north you go. You might be going through more cords of wood than you expect that you will. And obviously, if it's a place that this is just in our budget, we can't afford lots of land because this is just what we can afford, then a thing that you can do is obtain permits to cut wood on state land. That's a thing all over the place. You can have wood delivered. It would be to a mutual place. They probably wouldn't take it all the way up a dicey trail to your cabin. You would have to haul it in yourself. But you can buy firewood. It's usually like $200 a cord. A little bit more if it's already split. They'll sell them as what's called rounds, so they're just unsplit cut pieces. And you can split them yourself at your cabin. That's something that you can do. So there's ways to solve this problem. When it comes to firewood, never underestimate the physical requirements and risk, because firewood is a lot of work up here. And contrary to popular belief, it's a year-round job. I would suggest not making your first year in Alaska be the beginner's course in using a chainsaw, because it's not really a good crash course to throw at yourself when you're going to have so many other things that you need to deal with. So start familiarizing yourself now on how to use a chainsaw if you don't already know how. Watch videos, talk to somebody who is experienced at it. Never cut wood alone if you're new to it. There are salty dogs that do it by themselves, but if you're just starting out, that's just not safe. And don't forget to protect your ears, because the decibel level of a chainsaw can damage your ears and give you hearing loss or tinnitus, and I have a little bit of tinnitus and you don't want it. So make sure to take care of yourself and be safe. So the primary tree species that we cut up here are birch and spruce. The birch generally has to be cut and seasoned, which means dried for at least 6 months to a year before you can use it. And there has also been a sweeping bark beetle epidemic that unfortunately has attacked most of the spruce trees in Alaska, usually the older ones. While that's a shame, the upside is that means that these standing dead trees are bone dry and they're great to burn instantly. And also by clearing them, you're killing larvae that won't spread next year and giving yourself wildfire prevention. So they're incredibly useful, and a lot of people are going in on that right now. So let's talk about wood stoves for a second. They see a lot of action up here. And if you're looking at a cabin that already has one in it, it's good to go over some things to make sure that it's actually going to keep you from freezing to death and also not need to be fed tons of wood that's just going straight up and not radiating out into the room. So good things to watch out for are warping and rust, broken doors, or doors that just don't make a good seal when they shut. And you're going to have to check the stovepipe too, and most of them need to be cleaned of creosote before their first use in the winter. A clogged stovepipe leads to scary things like chimney fires and maybe even the cabin burning down, so don't skip checking this out. And if you have the means to do so, you can always replace the wood stove that's there if it's sketchy. What we have is called a catalytic stove, and it's much more efficient than our old one because it uses a catalyst to reburn unspent fuel, as well as a small wattage blower fan that helps distribute heat around the cabin. So we cut way less wood this way, and our burns are more efficient, and that's not like the wood stove when we first got here, which was pretty simple. It was basically just a box with a flue and an air intake. So we are really glad that we were able to replace that. Now, we had to buy it used in town from someone we knew. We did not buy this new. Brand new wood stoves cost a lot of money. It's a good thing to remember that even if you do have a propane or an oil heater installed, which are great heat sources and they're also great for a backup, you're not really going to be able to get out of cutting wood if you live rural. Knowing how to cut wood, how to build and maintain a good fire, are really crucial survival skills that I believe everyone should have, so don't skimp on learning this. Also, it's a huge anxiety relief to have a few cords of wood that are just stacked and ready to go. It's always a good idea for your survival up here. Heaters can break, you can run out of fuel or out of money to buy fuel, they may not be strong enough for sub-zero temperatures. A lot of things to think about that could happen, and it's good to have more than one way to solve a problem. So, not gonna lie, getting through a winter or even just your first winter in Alaska totally deserves its own episode, and we will have one, and I'll talk about clothing and procedures and routines and things like that, and I think that could be a lot of fun to talk about. So, what could possibly be the final thing to look for when you're getting ready to go off the grid? Of course, it's energy. Do you have those power supplies with you already, such as a generator, solar panels, a charge controller, an inverter, and a battery bank? If you're looking at a cabin, it might have those things already installed because off-grid life's off-grid life. Somebody needed it before you, so it might already be there. So it's important to ask yourself, do you know how to install and or maintenance these things? In our case, we did know because we had studied it a bit, and Jason had spent some time at the Solar Living Institute in California, and so he was quite well versed in it. And the system that was in the cabin when we moved in was pretty decent. It was good for a start. We have upgraded it since. I'm happy to say that in the recent years, we've actually upgraded our generator because we've been through a couple by now. And the more generic the brand is, sometimes they break faster. And that doesn't seem to matter if you have a safe enclosed space for them or not. They tend to not do well with high levels of demand in the long term. They're good for when there's a power outage or some kind of an emergency, but if you want a good generator for the long term, you might really want to look into that and stay away from generic cheap brands. If you're new to supplying your own power off the grid, I advise you to begin familiarizing yourself in how all that works, because off-grid rural life in Alaska can be very overwhelming, especially your first year. So the more prepared you are, it's like a test, you're going to do better. So having a good generator, definitely important, because things like a well pump or perhaps a water heater might require more power than something like solar can offer. But something very important to remember when you're going off the grid is that you need power storage. Deep cycle batteries specifically, because they're designed to store power and discharge really slowly. Deep cycle batteries are usually available online through solar and off-grid suppliers. In Alaska, batteries really ought to live indoors in an insulated and heated space so they don't freeze. You can keep them in a separate space like a shed, but it's kind of easier to keep them in the one space that you're already heating instead of having to heat two spaces. There are so many good videos on YouTube and wonderful resources for studying how to set up an off-grid power system, especially for solar. When it comes to solar power, solar works very well in the summertime, especially in 20 plus hours of daylight that we have during the summer. But around the winter months, the opposite extreme happens and the sun barely comes up over the horizon, so you might find yourself completely relying on a generator, which is another reason why power storage is so important. So you're not spending a lot of extra money on fuel and overusing your generator to where it can break down more often. So what about cooking? Many of us up here use propane ranges with propane tanks that live outside and are hooked up into the house. If you have a natural gas stove that you want to bring with you or buy, you're going to need a conversion kit because stoves that run on natural gas don't necessarily work with propane. You can cook on a wood stove. It's not the most practical year-round solution as you won't be running it year-round. Very good as a secondary source. Unless, of course, it's one of those amazing kitchen queens that I'm just crazy about. Well, propane ranges with an oven work really well. That's what I have. You just got to be sure that you have proper ventilation. Some have active pilot lights that require you to have a ventilation hood or keep a window cracked when they're lit. That last one can be a problem in a place with winter. In my opinion, never underestimate propane gas poisoning because I've actually experienced it, and it's no joke. So, how can you address the air quality problem with a propane stove? Well, a couple ways are: one, you can install a ventilation hood with a fan that blows to a duct going to the outside of your cabin that could be opened and shut to contain the cold. You might get lucky and someone's already put this in. If I saw an ad for a cabin and it had that, it would be at the top of my list so that you can vent all those gases out. Another thing you can do is you can also turn off the stove when it's not actively in use by shutting off the external gas tank. Or you can crack a window while the gas is being supplied to the stove. Like I said, that gets tricky in winter. The ultimate thing you can do is you can put in a stove with an electric ignition that requires no constantly lit pilot light. Therefore, the gas is only on when you're using it. Just remember that if you're using a device that's supplied with propane, I advise you to learn more about propane gas and how to use it correctly, store it, and the hazards that it poses to you. Another question that I get out here is, how do I keep a refrigerator? Well, refrigeration when you're off-grid is tricky. A lot of off-gridders know this. Regular domestic electric fridges require a lot of juice and have to turn on quite a bit during the day or the night. Propane fridges are common in many off-grid cabins, but they also require a constant pilot light, and they usually don't have a lot of food storage space and ask for a lot of gas, which can be costly. A way that we've turned this around is with a chest freezer, which we run with a thermostatic probe attachment from the off-grid power system. That way we can set it up to the temperature range that we want, and we can run the freezer as a fridge so it stays between 35 and 42 degrees. Another way this is more efficient is that it opens from the top. When you open a fridge door from the side, cold spills out easily, like a little waterfall. When you open a door from the top, the cold stays at the bottom, and they're also better insulated, so we get more out of that. I actually keep my old propane fridge on the porch, and it doesn't have any power at all. And for about 5 months out of the year, it's a free freezer. So that's something that you can do. Don't forget about the cold outside. It's just as much of an energy source for keeping your food cold. You just have to make sure that critters can't get into it. Be aware of wildlife. We do have bears and scavengers. And also remember that temperatures may not be constant. So check on your food every day to make sure that it's frozen. And the most important thing to add to this energy section is that it's not if appliances and vehicles are going to break down, it's when. So being prepared for what you're going to do when that happens will make you feel better and make you more self-sufficient. A resource that we love to use is YouTube, and you can learn a lot of valuable information from there, and it can really help you if you're just getting started with these things, or if you have some off-the-wall problem that you just don't know how to solve. Chances are someone may have solved it, and it might be on YouTube. Internet out this far is achievable. Like, believe it or not, I do everything on 4 or 5G with my phone. If you want something a little better, you can get satellite internet, such as Starlink. It is pretty expensive for the install, and I think it's like $90 a month. But if you really need that, or like you have a remote job, you can hook that up. Nevertheless, having a good preparedness mindset for how you're going to maintenance and take care of these vehicles and appliances that are so crucial to your life is a really, really good thing. Because Alaska is going to test you and everything that you own. So demand is going to be high. So by taking care of all of these things that help sustain life, you'll make your life out here better. So, whoa, On this episode, we talked about a lot. We talked about location, access, water, heat, and energy needs, all being the foundational building blocks for beginning an off-grid rural life in a place like Alaska. If you want to start an off-grid life and it's not in Alaska, you can apply this anywhere. I went ahead and made them specific to this climate and this place based on what I know and what I've been through. And hopefully I did a really good job at completely overwhelming you with all of these tips. And while I knew fundamentally all these things before moving to Alaska, actually living here just really cemented them more. And if you want to do well transitioning to any off-grid homesteading life, especially if it's Alaska, just do your best to not come here unprepared. We, of course, have constant work to do to improve upon these things ourselves, but, that's part of the work of building a homestead. It never really stops, but that's a good thing, especially if you start out right. I'm proud of our progress, and I know it's a work in progress, and we didn't have to hit the ground running with a place that was already perfect. That's what gives us a chance to grow, to learn, and then to be really thankful for what we have. So I want to thank you all for joining me for this debut episode of my podcast. I really appreciate it so much, and like I said, we're by no means out of things to talk about. I could talk for a couple of years about all this stuff, so I'll spare you all till next time. Please check out the show notes for links to my blog, links to the Instagram account for this show, where I'd love for you to leave me feedback. You can follow it for updates and comment on an episode, and even tell me what you'd like me to cover next. You can help support the show and my homestead by donating on Patreon. That link is in the show notes, as well as the Instagram account for this at my Far North Cabin. Also, check out the link for my main account at alaska.redhead, where you can follow my life up here in some more visual detail. So thank you so much for listening. Until next time, keep building that homestead mindset and stay wild.